Hello, everyone. How you doing today? This is Larry Port, and it is promptly 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Welcome to our Florida Bar CLE. Today, we're going to be talking about the lean law firm close up. Many of you might know that I have written a book with a co-author called The Lean Law Firm, and we're going to talk about one specific aspect of it today, which is eliminating waste and bottlenecks. Right now, I'm going to share my screen. Let's get started. So why do I have any basis in sharing expertise with you today? All right, so I started Rocket Matter in 2008, and these are my many roles that you can see on the screen, right? So I'm a dad, I'm a husband, you got 2 dogs and a cat. I used to code. Now I'm a software executive running Rocket Matter. I built the first version of Rocket Matter, but then people started buying it, and now I'm running the company. So I write a lot. I write all the time for Rocket Matter, and I wrote this book for the American Bar Association, Lean Law Firm. My kid's involved in Little League, which has led me to coach, even though I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm very active in the Anti-Defamation League, and I combat online hate and hate in general and hate speech. It's a big passion of mine. If you want to get involved, let me know. And I'm always trying to stay in shape and eat the right things, although it's easier said than done. And we bought basically fried chicken tenders for the entire staff today. So I guess there it goes. In any case, my co-author is Dave Maxfield. He's the one that wrote The Lean Law Firm with me, and to him I owe a lot of the ideas about systems thinking in the book, because he's this like wizard lawyer from South Carolina that basically decided that he was going to run his law firm like a factory. And so my idea and his ideas combined for this like book, and we have a podcast together. He's a really awesome guy. The way the book is laid out, it's very accessible. We decided that we didn't want to just have a regular textbook. We wanted to tell a story. So there's like 11 chapters plus the foreword, which I spent a lot of time writing, by the way. So it's like really its own chapter. And half of it is this like kind of like novel about this guy trying to run a law firm. And the other half is, the business terminology and the explanation about what the guy's doing in the law firm. So in any case, you can buy it online. In terms of lean, so the reason that we're going to dive into waste is because like waste is one of the most fundamental ideas of running a lean law firm. The misconception with lean is that it's all about cost cutting and then just, having 3 people working for your law firm. That's not the idea, right? The most important thing is to understand that there's a difference between value and waste. And so value to your client can be direct or indirect. So value to your client can be like performing awesome legal work for your client, a great brief, a great hearing, a great motion, a great trial, what have you, right? And then there is indirect value. So we just recorded a podcast with a guy who does security consulting for law firms. So making sure that your security up to date has value for your clients because it protects their confidentiality. Doing your CLE isn't direct legal work for your clients, but it is critical because it maintains your license and makes you a better attorney, right? And then there's things that are completely wasteful. And that's what we want to focus on because that's where we're going to be able to make more money. Now, we're going to talk about all these different waste types, and I'm going to go into each one of these, right? But according to lean, now lean has a rich tradition. It is a formalized thing that was, I guess I should call it a methodology that was really invented by Taiichi Ohno in Toyota. And really, Taiichi Ohno's ideas came from, Americans that went over to Japan following World War II when they were trying to rebuild their economy and industry. But so in this weird kind of full circle type situation, a bunch of American professors started studying what Toyota was doing, and they generalized the Toyota production system, which is what Taiichi Ohno invented, and called it lean. And lean is being used in software. It's being used in government. It's being used in healthcare. It's being used in all these industries. And Dave and I, my co-author, did not see it being used in legal. There's a couple of lean people in the legal vertical where there's maybe 12 of us. We're getting the word out. Now a lot of law firms are trying to incorporate these ideas. But these waste types that you see here, transport, inventory, motion, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, and defects, which we'll get into, are all formalized things that Taiichi Ohno outlined. We're going to be talking about constraints. So bottlenecks. what's going on in your law firm that's preventing the flow of money, the flow of cases, things that are happening, because this is a form of waste. It's a form of, it's something going on in your law firm that if you eliminate, you're going to be a lot more profitable and provide a lot more value to your client. Remember, we're talking value and waste. Okay, and then we're going to be talking technology, because technology is one of the best ways to eliminate waste. In the book, we say in lean, waste is bad and must be eliminated whenever possible, which is where technology can really shine. So the one thing I want to say is that, like, when it comes to all this kind of stuff, like, I feel that I can overwhelm people with information because I'm enthusiastic about this subject matter. I love talking about it. It's a lot. It's very rich, and I get the feeling that a lot of times people walk away with a bell rung over their head, and I just feel like people get overwhelmed. So the message I want to say is that not everything needs to happen at once. So if you can kind of get the core message that there's probably wasteful things going on at your law firm, and I'm going to help you think about what those might be. If you can write down 1, 2, maybe 3 things that you're doing in your law firm today that you think you can maybe optimize or eliminate altogether, then I think you've achieved success. And then you can put a plan in place to kind of do it, continually. The thing with lean is this notion of continual improvement. Toyota has this notion of true north, right? So it's this ideal of perfection. You're going to try and achieve true north. You're going to try and get there. You might not get there, but you're going to try, right? One of my favorite quotes is from the book Catch-22, that Yossarian wanted to live forever or die in the attempt. And that's what we're going to try and do here, right? We are going to try and do our best little by little. Okay, so let's go back to these waste types. By the way, the word for waste in lean is MUDA. So we're going to be talking about MUDA. Okay. 2 of the types of waste. Now, keep in mind, these forms of waste were defined for a factory context. So what we're going to try and do is contextualize them for a law firm. And the first one is like transportation waste, and what's kind of closely related in terms of legal, which is motion waste, right? Now, we interviewed, some of you may know her, Adriana Linares. She does have like a residence in Florida, used to be from here. She's been at a lot of like Florida events, and she is an IT technology consultant for law firms, and she now works with the San Diego bar. She's done a lot of work with our bar association here in the state of Florida. And when we interviewed her, she said that the single biggest waste of time in law firms is searching for information. So, how long does it take you to find contacts? How long does it take you to find documents, right? So transportation and motion waste kind of refers to, in a factory context, moving stuff around. In the transportation context, it's like, schlepping raw materials from one place to another. Motion is like really has to do with ergonomics, but let's think about it in a knowledge work context. Where is your stuff? How long does it take you to get your stuff? Do you have a paperless office? Can you get stuff right from your computer and search it and find it instantly? Or do you have to hunt around for 15 minutes to find the file that you're looking for? Do your clients have to travel to see you? Do you have to travel to see your clients? Can this happen virtually, right? We're talking virtually. I don't have to go to your law firm to have this CLE. Do you have to travel for CLE, or can you do it remote if you want to, like you're doing today, right? Can you use tools like DocuSign? Do you have to like mail stuff around? Or can it be done electronically? It's amazing what can be done through the computer these days. I know I sound like I'm 90 years old when I say that, but it is amazing. Every time I sign a DocuSign document, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. This is so easy. And what about basic things? Like, is your office ergonomic? Do you have your workstation set up so that you can quickly move around and do all the things that you need to do and find the information that you need to find? Right? So all these are examples and questions that you should ask yourself of, like, how are you exposed to transportation or motion waste, right? And so what's interesting about these categories of waste is that it kind of triggers you to think about things in different ways. And with that, I kind of want to ask a question. I have a couple of poll questions. These are a lot of fun because it makes it a lot more interactive. So we're going to launch our first poll question. And our first poll question for those of you that are doing something else or not really paying attention, is, and I mean you, yes, how paperless is your law firm? So here is the poll, okay? The poll is being distributed, right? So there's 4 choices here. And there's the embarrassing ones that people aren't going to want to choose, but haven't started going paperless, in the planning phase, started it but not fully paperless, and as paperless as possible, right? So be honest with yourself here, because I'm going to tell you what, when we talk to IT consultants, now, like, we know what we do here. You know, Rocket Matter, I haven't even introduced what we do really, but we're a practice management and time and billing software company, and you know, document storage is part of that. But there's a lot of lawyers and IT consultants that like really specialize in, you know, document storage and document management, and they tell us that the biggest single thing that they've done to optimize their firms or the firms that they're working with is going paperless. So really be honest with yourself here about where you're at. Here's the results, okay? It looks like the majority of respondents, well, more respondents than in any other category, let's call it, started it but are not fully paperless. 34% are as paperless as possible. Let me just say that I'm probably as paperless as possible, but I still use paper, just so everybody knows. Like, you know, you don't have to get rid of the legal pad to be paperless. Like, I use, if you've seen my YouTube videos, I have this daily planner. I love my little pen that I fill it out every day. So I'm a big fan of paper for certain things, but every document that I work on, all my work product, all that kind of stuff goes in the computer and is digitized. And if I whiteboard something out, or if I write some notes down that are critical that I want to hang on to, I take a picture of it and it goes into, you know, Evernote. So that's, in my opinion, as paperless as possible. Now, for those of you that haven't started going paperless or in the planning phase, the good news is that you are probably going to be a lot more profitable in the future once you complete all that. And if you do wish to go paperless and you're really just having trouble getting started, let me know. You can email me, larry@rocketmatter.com, and I can send you a bunch of resources. I can send you videos that we've done on it with other attorneys that have been in your situation, and I can also introduce you to IT consultants that I trust that I think would do a good job. So, you know, if you do want to go paperless, I can help you out with that. Okay. Now, inventory and waiting. This is another form of waste. The first one is a really interesting question, which is, are you closing out cases promptly? Is anyone at the firm holding up the process? Are you collecting payments as promptly as possible? And can filing be faster? So I have a lot of interesting stories about these. So what we find a lot is that law firms think they need more clients because they want more revenue. So, you know, they want to make more money. So their first instinct is to go and market more, spend more on marketing, so they have more inbound leads and they can close those leads, and then they can get more cases. When we look at how law firms operate, a lot of times they have a lot of these cases that are in progress that if they just focused on finishing them and collecting money for them, they wouldn't have the same need. In fact, that's where I would advise most law firms, especially smaller law firms, to look first. What cases can you just like make done, finish, collect money for? Because the problem is that a lot of law firms fall into this trap. And remember, I've worked with like thousands of these guys. They fall into this trap where they get themselves involved with like a $3,000 a month marketing contract with somebody that they can't really get out of. And so now they are, not only are they not finishing the cases that they have and collecting on the cases that they have, they don't have the machine set up to finish those cases. So they're spending this money, and maybe the marketing works, and maybe it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, then you just have this vicious spiral. If it does work, then new cases are coming in, and you don't have a system in place to finish them and collect the money anyhow. So you're not really solving the problem. So the biggest issue that I see with law firms is that they just don't solve the cases. And this even happens like with personal injury lawyers who get settlements. So they'll win the case. This is absolutely 100% true. And maybe you have friends that are like this, or maybe you're like this. They'll win the case, they'll get the judgment, and they're just so thrilled with the victory that they don't hustle and get the settlement. They're not aggressive on getting the actual payment. So then they don't get paid. And this phenomenon really does happen. So making sure that you close out files, big deal. Now, is anyone at the firm holding up the process? So here's one thing is that as we go through this lecture, you're going to see that there's like a certain flow that you want to be setting up for your your workflow for your cases, and you might have a cog in the wheel, meaning someone in the office that is just not able to keep up with everybody else. And when that happens, it slows the entire system down. So that is something to pay attention to as well. Are you collecting payments as promptly as possible? That's kind of related to what I was talking about before about closing out the cases and finishing them, but collections is a whole different ballgame. Collections are difficult for law firms because, you know, on the one hand, you're advocating for your clients and then you have to go ask them for money. And that's just a very awkward situation to be in. So, you know, collecting is its own art form. And one thing that is incredibly helpful with that is, you know, payment processing and allowing people to pay online, setting up recurring payments, and just doing things in an automated fashion so you don't have to keep hammering away for those checks from your clients and having difficult conversations with them. The last thing is, can filing be faster? When I'm talking about filing, let me tell you a little story. So, and this is actually my co-author Dave's story. So credit where credit is due. So Dave used to, he's in Columbia, South Carolina, and they used to drive their files to the courthouse to file them. Then he considered this to be a colossal waste of time. So what they started doing was they started mailing them to the courthouse. They did not have a way to electronically file them, so they would mail them to the courthouse. And so by mailing them, instead of like driving to the courthouse, his paralegal wasn't spending like 4 hours like driving over to the courthouse, doing the work, and then coming back. So it was a lot more efficient on the surface. However, when he sat down to think about it, when he would send the paralegal out to file at the courthouse, he would get the document filed that same day. And then, you know, the case was off and running, and that was basically matter open date. When he would file through the mail, you know, it had to go through the mail. It had to be opened in the stack at the courthouse, and then the response had to be received. So the matter open date was 7 days later. Now, one of the things and phenomenons that we'll discuss later is that the shorter the time is overall for a case, even if it's by 7 days, the more money that you'll make in a given year. So as soon as he realized this, they went back to the old way of doing things, which is actually the more efficient way of doing things, which on the surface wasn't more efficient. So it was a pretty interesting story and a pretty enlightening story. So inventory and waiting is another form of waste. By the way, inventory from a legal perspective, you don't have stuff off the shelf. Your inventory are your cases. So when you model a law firm like you model a factory and you think about like goods and items and inventory, you got to think of it in terms of your cases themselves. Okay. Are there any questions so far? Right. So before I get into this one, I want to ask a question, which is this. Do you send out paper invoices through the mail, or do you send out electronic invoices? This is an important question to answer because the invoicing process in law firms is very burdensome, and it has to do. There's a lot of it has to do with this concept of overprocessing. Overprocessing is another form of waste that was identified by Taiichi Ohno. So now when we talk, I'm going to let some more people answer this poll question because maybe some people are distracted. They're coming back to things. They're getting a cup of coffee. So we have about half the people writing in that they're doing their stuff. And I'm actually a little bit surprised by the results. So, you know, if you have experience in this area, please let us know. I'm going to show you what the response are so far. So we almost had about a 70% response rate. Most people are sending out electronic invoices. 28% are sending out paper invoices. So for the people sending out electronic invoices, congratulations. You're doing the right thing, especially if you're doing them in batch. So And over processing refers to doing something that can be done in a lot simpler way. So adding complexity to a process that doesn't need to be as complex as it is. And the perfect example of that is invoicing in a law firm. Invoicing, especially if it's a long drawn out process at your law firm, is a completely wasteful activity. Obviously, you need to do it because you need to be able to make money. But in terms of value to the client, if you're spending like a day or two generating invoicing, that's complete waste. So I would love to hear from the people from the from the paper perspective. Um, you know, why you do it. Somebody's saying that because some clients don't have email, right? Well, there might be ways to, that's actually astounding. But if you don't have email, then I guess they can't receive it. That's an interesting thing. I would love to find out from other people who are not sending out electronic invoices why they're not sending out electronic invoices, because when you send out paper invoices, this is what has to happen. You have to print out all the bills, you have to fold them, you have to stuff them in envelopes, you have to address them, you have to stamp them, and then you send them and off they go. And then the clients receive them, and then they can go online and they can pay, right? If you have electronic payments set up, right? So, and by the way, this attorney is saying that it's elderly clients most of the time, right? So, if that's the case and you still have to send out paper invoices for some of your clients, then, I guess you're probably already doing what you would want to be doing in this case, in that you want to just really minimize your surface area. You don't want to have exposure to that many people that are doing this. You want to minimize that number of clients that is receiving paper invoices, and really try and make it not an option if possible. So, if you think about that technology adoption lifecycle curve, you have, and I don't have it on my screen right now, but you've probably seen it before. It looks like a bell curve. At the leading edge, you have the innovators, then you have the early adopters, then you have the early majority, then you have the late majority, and then you have the laggards. What we're talking about in this case is laggards. And sometimes the only way laggards can be brought along is if they don't have the option. Like, for example, you can't use a rotary telephone anymore because the phone networks don't support that anymore. Laggards had to be brought along because they moved entirely to touch phones. So, sometimes those people have to move along through no other choice. So another way that you can eliminate waste for overprocessing, like technology really helps with overprocessing, like document automation. We're going to show that a little bit, like being able to instantly produce a document from data that you're storing in your database, as opposed to like finding an existing file, opening it up, copying it, and then doing a find and replace, which introduce defect errors, which defects are their own kind of waste, right? So, okay, so we've talked about transportation in motion. We've talked about inventory and waiting, and we've talked about overprocessing. Now, before we talk about the next one, I want to talk a little bit about bottlenecks. So we're gonna come back to this slide. Bottlenecks and constraints, right? They're a little bit, a bottleneck is basically a constraint in a process. So considering the following factory example, let's say you have a factory and it has these different machines in it. It has 4 different machines, and the first machine produces 60 units per day. And by the way, when I say machine, you can substitute that. Like, let's say that you have a paralegal or a lawyer, and this is the flow through that a case has to go through, or a document has to go through. So let's say that one unit can produce 60 units per day. The next one can produce 70 units per day. You have one that produces 40 units per day, and then you have another one that produces 60 units per day. So what happens is, in this situation, it may be apparent to some, or it might be a little confusing to some, right? So what happens in this context is that the 70 units per day machine, which is this one right here, pardon me, the 70 units per day machine, the second from the left, that's going to build up this pile of inventory in front of the 40 units per day machine, because the 40 units per day machine cannot keep up. So no matter how fast that 70 units per day machine can get, it's limited, it's bottlenecked by the following machine in the process, because it can only do 40 units per day. which means that the fastest the entire system can go is 40 units per day. Because you imagine the output from that 40 units per day machine, the next one in the sequence does 60 units per day. So as fast as that 40 units per day machine could kick something out, the 60 units per day machine can just absorb it and keep going. But the speed of the system is not 60 because it will never have more than 40 per day. So if hopefully that makes sense, this explanation makes sense. If it doesn't, I can go back to it. So what you end up having is that you can have a problem, believe it or not, with overproduction, right? And a lot of times when people evaluate technology, they get all excited because they can streamline one aspect of their process. But if you streamline one aspect of your process and the next process down the line cannot consume the stuff that you're doing, you have your own problem on your hand. You now have like all this backup of information and you can get an overflowing inbox, right? So that's one thing you kind of want to like observe. Is one part of the firm producing more than the others can handle, right? And if that's the case, is there a way to supplement the people that are slow to be able to leverage that overproduction? Because if you just have stuff piling up, then you can get into kind of a thrashing situation where you just are never able to get anything done, right? Also, in terms of overproduction, are you actually just doing too much of one thing? Like, are you working a motion past the point that it's really productive? Because that's a form of waste on its own. Like, perfectionism is the enemy of the very good, is something my dad always said, and it's very, very true. So, if you have something that is going to work, once it's going to work and once it's going to succeed, beyond that point, there's very little point of working on it. It's just a form of waste, right? So that's another kind of form of overproduction. And the other form, the other question you might want to ask yourself is that the stuff that you're working on, does it have to be done right now? Like, can it be done later, right? Because a lot of times you want to be working, you really want to figure out what is the most critical thing to be working on to make sure that everything is going on. And if you're working on something that really is important right now, it can just gum up the works and fill up somebody else's inbox when it doesn't need to happen. So you really want to be careful that you don't have it's part of kind of systems thinking where you don't want to have too much of a pile up in front of any one part of the process. So it's kind of interesting stuff. Okay, and then the last form of waste is defects. So these are 737 MAX planes that are sitting idle at the Boeing factory, I believe in Everett, Washington, or in Seattle, and they're just sitting there because of this horrible defect that they had with the software on the plane that resulted in these two crashes last year. So in legal and in software, like our defects are very, very serious. They're not as serious as the defects on a Boeing, but they're very serious to us and to our careers, right? So for example, if a law firm screws up their trust accounting, they can lose their license. And so that's kind of the worst case scenario for a law firm. I mean, obviously, if you screw up and your client goes to jail, or it can be a life and death situation in some, I guess, criminal cases. But for the most part, the likeliest worst case scenario is getting in trouble with the bar association, or missing something, or getting in trouble with your client. So you don't want to have defects. The kind of standard bad case scenario with a law firm that isn't as extreme as getting in trouble is like having to redo work, right? When you have a defect, by definition, you're going to have to go fix it. So you're going to have to spend more time doing something than you otherwise would. So defects are a major form of waste in a law firm. Now, all these things are good, but the question is that how do we then take these forms of waste and implement them and see if we can improve? Before we kind of continue, what I'd like you to do is I would love for you to write down 1, 2, or 3 things that your law firm is currently doing right now that might fit into one of these categories, and I'll put them back on the screen so everybody can see them. But we have transportation waste, inventory waste, motion waste, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, and defects. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to actually write down as an activity 1, 2, or 3 things that you're doing that you feel are wasteful that you could probably improve upon. And what I would love is if you don't mind sharing one of your ideas or one of the things that you want to improve on, I would love for you to share it with me so that I could read it out loud to the people on the webinar, so that other people might be able to get ideas. If this was like a live situation and I was working with you guys in groups, then this would be the kind of time period where we would take 5 minutes, write notes down, and then people would raise their hand and share them with the group. By the way, I do live sessions all the time if you want me to speak at your law firm or your bar association. Just did one recently in St. Louis. So in any case, identify some forms of waste. And now let's hopefully we'll get some brave souls to write in what they want to do to eliminate their waste. And next, let's talk about quantifying waste elimination and how we know we're succeeding, right? So this is going to require us to go into some of the lean concepts. And if you've been to any of my lean webinars before, you're going to see a lot of the same slides because I have to go over the same vocabulary that we've done before. So the way that a law firm, a knowledge firm, as opposed to something that is actually creating a physical product, so you're doing kind of like intellectual work, the way that you can model your process is through this concept of a Kanban board. Very, very simple idea. Looks like you would do it in elementary school. You have these things called you have these vertical lanes. We call them swim lanes. This one, there's 3 swim lanes. Up next, work in progress, done. This is basically this is the most basic form of a Kanban board. Up next, work in progress, and done. So you have on the left what you have to work on. You have in the middle what's currently being worked on, and you have on the right-hand side what's been finished. Now, in real life, it's going to be a lot more complicated than this. You're still going to have a concept of up next on the left and done on the right. But in a law firm context, you're going to have several more swim lanes that kind of denote the progress of a case. And it really varies on a firm-to-firm basis what you want to have done. The trick is not to have too many of these swim lanes. You want to have a good amount of them, but you don't want to overdo it with the swim lanes. So if you have if you go beyond maybe 7 swim lanes, you might want to take another look at it and try and shrink them back down. But you might have something like filed. You might have something like pre-trial, trial, settlement. You got to think about the flow of your cases and really figure out what makes sense. And if you take a look, one thing I failed to mention here is that if you look at these are like index cards, right? So this can be physically done when you're first getting started. An easy way to do it is to take a whiteboard, get some index cards or post-it notes, or even better, those index cards that have the sticky stuff on them, and you write the names of your cases on them. And then as they travel through things, then that's how you do it. Some people like to do this with matters. I don't think that, or not with to-dos inside of matters. I think that's a very difficult way to do things. I think what you want to see is you want to see the flow of your cases, because it's your cases that really correspond to income. So, because one of the most powerful things about a Kanban board that we're going to talk about later is that it can help you get more income. It can help you generate more revenue. So here, this is using a tool called Trello, and Trello is a virtual Kanban board, and it has individual virtual note cards that represent the different cases in the system. So once we have this notion of a Kanban board and this notion of a kind of like a cycle or a process that a case will go through, then we can measure how long it takes for the case to go through that whole process. So the cycle time is a very important term in lean. It refers to the amount of time between the time that you start on something and the time as something is done. Now, think about how important that is to measure if you're trying to eliminate waste and become more efficient. Because if you average your cycle times now, and then you implement a bunch of waste reduction and process improvement techniques, then your cycle time should go down. And that's important because when your cycle time decreases, that means that you can finish more cases in a year, and that means that you can make more money. So if you look at a Kanban board, the cycle time would be the amount of time it takes between the client is signed, not when the client is a prospect. You don't want to include prospects that, okay, this guy may or may not be a client. You want to include actual clients that you just signed up. So the day the firing gun starts to the time you collect money and the work is done. Collecting money is a critical part of that, right? Because if you have a problem collecting money and it takes you a long time to collect money, then your cycle time will increase. Our goal is to get the cycle time down as much as possible because that's what's going to increase your revenue. You may have noticed that I use the term case unit. This is kind of a convention that we use when we talk about lean to differentiate between a case and the revenue portion of the case. So, for example, in this foolish lawsuit, I am suing Chuck Norris, Bruce Lee, Jet Li, and the Wu-Tang Clan. So 4 different defendants. So it's really 4 case units because each one of those things is going to settle at a different time, right? So it's going to settle for different monetary amounts. So if I want to have some sort of predictive analysis of how my law firm is going to function, I better separate those 4 things out because otherwise it's going to be impossible for me to model and predict how things are going to flow through my law firm. Now, on a Kanban board, you have like, when I talked about before, different matters get different index cards. In reality, it works if different case units have different index cards. That's how you're going to be able to start predicting your revenue more and more and more. Remember before when I was talking about cycle time and how if you decrease cycle time, then you can finish more cases in a year. The number of cases that you finish in a year is known as your throughput rate, right? So throughput rate is kind of like, all right, we're watching the end of the calendar year and we're seeing how many cases we finish in that time. So, it's a rate. It's not a measurement of speed of the case. The time it takes to finish a case is the cycle time. Throughput rate says how many you're going to do in a year. And how many you're going to do in a year is what really determines how much money you're going to make. It's actually, so in this example, if I finish those 3 cases in a year, the throughput rate would be 3. So if we know the average case unit value, like the number of dollars per case unit, we're going to start being able to model out how successful we're going to be here. All cases have different values, right? But what is the average? And to some extent, this is an artificial construct because what we're trying to do is we're trying to model the efficiency of our firm. And we're trying to model the financial success of our firm. And with financial models, you have to have a fair degree of simulation in it. So, but if we know averages, then it does help us. And if we know speeds, it does help us because we can apply something called an income formula to help determine all this. And I understand that I'm going through this stuff kind of quickly, but I think some of this stuff is intuitive. If it's not, I'm happy to talk to each one of you independently if I have to go over these ideas. So, but think about it. It makes total sense. The income of your firm is equal to the throughput rate times the average case unit value. Because if we can increase the number of cases that we finish in a year, right? And or we increase the value of those cases, then we increase our income. So if we're able to increase the number of cases we finish in a given year, right? So if we're able to go from 100 cases to 200 cases, then we would double our income if the pricing was the same. Or if we kept the amount of cases we had at the same rate, if we only finished 100 cases a year still, but we doubled our price and the average case unit value was, let's say $2,000 instead of $1,000, then we would double our income there too. So it's really how much money you're going to make really is determined by the average value of your cases and how many of them you finish in a given year. Are there any questions about that so far? Okay, I'm going to continue and the reason I'm going through all this stuff is because the question is how do we increase our throughput rate? We decrease our cycle time. And how do we decrease our cycle time? It's by eliminating waste, which is what this whole webinar is about. And one of the easiest ways to eliminate waste is with automation, right? So what automation allows you to do is it allows you to replace manual processes with automated processes. Before we were talking about invoicing. In the example on the screen is a matter template, right? So the way that matter templates work, not just in Rocket Matter, but in other competing software, is that you define every time you set up a matter, you say, what tasks have to be done, what calendar events and deadlines do I have to do, what custom fields need to be filled out, what's the billing structure, so that every time you create a matter of this type, you don't have to do that over and over and over again, or your paralegal or your clerk doesn't have to do that over and over and over again, right? It's automated. It's one click of one button, and it saves an hour's worth of work. That's a very clear way of reducing overproduction waste, right, or overprocessing waste. So that eliminates all that, right? Eliminates that waste. And that's the whole idea. The more you can eliminate that waste, the shorter the cycle times are. The shorter the cycle times are, the more cases you finish in a year and the more money you make, right? When we talked about invoicing, that is a very taxing manual process. So with invoicing, let me see if I have an example of it here. I think I do later on, but we talked about you have contrast where you click a button and all of your invoices are sent out to your clients instantly, right? Assume that you've gone through the pre-bills and everything's all set up and ready to go. At some point, you're going to send out bills. So contrast, printing everything out, folding it, stuffing it in the envelope, sending it out and waiting for the payment and recording the checks and all that, to pressing a button, having all of your invoices automatically emailed out on your behalf, and then having your clients click on links and pay with credit cards online that updates all of your ledgers. Like, so much easier to do electronic billing, so much more efficient, and such much less waste, right? Automation is your friend. Now, in the book, we say that if you're not running a paperless office, you're neck deep in MUDA, or the Japanese word for waste. And I had as a guest on a webinar last year, and I'm happy to share this webinar with you if you want, just using the questions widget, or email me, larry@rocketmatter.com, and I'll send you a link to it. But I interviewed this guy named Brian Sims. He's a Rocket Matter client. He is in the Chicagoland area, and he's a regular speaker at ABA Tech Show, and he's like a paperless expert. He's a lawyer who's a paperless expert, and his whole thing is that going paperless is the #1 way you can improve the efficiency in your law firm, and I don't doubt it. Right? His webinar is awesome because he's thought through all sorts of different things. He's thought through how to file things, where to store the original documents, how to organize your PDF, folder structures, file names, what technology to use. It's just an unbelievable wealth of information that he's happy to just give out for free. So, it's a really good idea in your law firm to have personal desktop scanners. We have a relationship with Fujitsu ScanSnap. You can scan a document, it goes into Rocket Matter, but we don't have a financial relationship with them. We don't get money if people sell scanners. I will tell you this though, the people that have them, and I have them too, will tell you that these are the best scanners that you can get. That when, they're not multifunction devices, which is a good thing. They do one thing, they do them well. It can do 20, 30 pages per minute, something like that. If the thing goes in at an angle, it'll de-skew it and straighten everything out for you. And it's just an incredible piece of hardware, right? This one is the model that has ScanSnap Cloud, so it connects to your wireless router, and you can configure it so that when you scan it, it goes into Rocket Matter, into your documents folder. So it's a pretty hot piece of technology. In terms of document storage, we use Google Drive here, to be honest. I mean, Rocket Matter has its own document storage. It has versioning. It's good. It's associated with Matters. But, if you're looking for hardcore document storage, if you're a larger law firm, you might want to take a look at NetDocuments. If you're 15 people or larger, NetDocuments offers some pretty powerful functionality. Rocket Matter, we're very happy using Google Drive because we use Gmail and other Google tools, Google Calendar, and so on and so forth. Dropbox is great. Box is great. OneDrive, iCloud. Well, I don't really like iCloud so much. I just think it's awkward the way it fits in with the whole Apple ecosystem. But I love these other solutions out there. And storage is like pennies on the dollar. So if there ever was a time to go paperless, now is the time to do it. And these are the services I would recommend. We talked a little bit about document automation. So document automation or document assembly is the ability to create a document instantly. So the whole idea is let's say that you're using a program like ours, and you have a database. And for each matter, you store the case number, you store the county, you store the name of the court, you store the court address. So then let's say that you have a template document that you can stuff all this information inside of, right? So you click a button and bam, it produces a document that has all this stuff in it. So it automatically says in the first court of Chuck Norris, pulling from the database, it pulls the case number from the database, instantly creates this document for you without you having to find one, open one, and do a find and replace, which, by the way, leaves a ton of room for defect errors. One time I actually fired a law firm because they were doing work for Rocket Matter. They were producing documents for us back in the day, back in 2008 when we had beta license agreements. And I had delivered documents, just trusting them, and it may be foolish on my part, but what did I know? I'd never run a business before. So I distributed these beta license agreements on our behalf, and they produced the document by doing like a find and replace, and they made all sorts of errors in it because they weren't checking for like possessives and so on and so forth. So they lost a client, and we became a very decently sized company out of it. So in any case, you don't want to have defects, and document automation prevents that. This is kind of what it looks like in the Rocket Matter program. Now, obviously, there's other software that does this as well. Other practice management software. So if it's important to you, just make sure that they do document automation, also called document assembly. One of the things we talk about in the book is invoicing and collection, and there's just so much. It's probably the biggest form of waste there is that I see in law firms. They leave so much money on the table, and it could be poor billing practices, meaning like they don't track their time very well, or it's difficult for them to track their time, or time tracking is inconvenient for them, or their fee tracking. So they just like hemorrhage things on the capture side of things. Then the invoicing side and the collection side, as we've discussed, can be rather burdensome for law firms. So, improving that situation is really good. We offer batch billing functionality in our product, so to automate the creation and or sending of invoices. This thing can do thousands of invoices in minutes. Again, I'm just showing, I don't know what our competitors do. I'm just showing what we do. But I know that other products on the market offer batch billing functionality so that it can create all of your invoices at once. And then electronic invoicing, the ability for law firms to send out an invoice and have clients pay online. So I have one other poll, right, that I wanted to ask people, which is, do you allow clients to pay bills online? Because allowing clients to pay bills online is like a very easy way to optimize the collections part of your process. And if you click no, I would love to like understand why that is. Now, maybe some of you are in practices like insurance defense, where the insurance companies will just stroke you a check. But when and if it at all possible, being able to kind of accept credit cards or ACH payments or electronic payments can greatly simplify things, especially if you combine it with payment plans or recurring billings where you don't even have to do anything. It just automatically sends the invoice and for you. So in any case, people are answering that question. Final votes. I'll tell you, we had a pretty even split. I mean, even in the terms of nice round numbers, but not an even split. Most people say no. So I would love to find out why people are not accepting electronic payments. Because to me, it just seems like, and I understand that some people are concerned about like a fee, but when you think about the time value of money and you think about the number of write-offs that people are doing because they're not doing electronic payments, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like it's law firms that accept credit cards end up having much higher collection rates than ones that do not, because you can keep the card on file and you have all these other advantages as well. Okay. How else can we shorten cycle time and increase our throughput rate and thus increase our profitability and our income? Finding and eliminating constraints. Now, if you're really interested in this whole idea of constraints and how they can affect systems, and I was talking a little bit before about kind of a counterintuitive idea that if somebody overproduces, it can cause a pileup in the system, and then the next person in line, if they're not as fast, that can create kind of a thrashing situation where a lot of stuff doesn't get done. It's kind of an interesting systems phenomenon, and it's explored very much in this book called The Goal by a guy named Eliyahu Goldratt. And he was an Israeli like physicist or something like that ended up studying systems and engineering and industrial engineering and things like that. So The Goal is actually a novel-based form, kind of inspired how we wrote half of the Lean Law Firm. So in The Goal, the narrator talks about going on a, he's busy trying to turn his factory around, but he gets stuck trying to lead a Boy Scout troop through the mountains, and he learns a very valuable lesson. He learns that the troop can only go as fast as its slowest guy, because the troop has to go from point A to point B without it has to get there in one piece. Like, nobody can be left behind. You don't want a bear to eat a Boy Scout. That's really bad for the Boy Scout and for you personally. So you want to get the troop from point A to point B, and so he realized that they could only go as fast as their slowest kid, which was Herbie. And then he realized that, he had his own Herbies in his factory, and that the output could only be as fast as his slowest Herbie at the factory. And it's true with a law firm as well, right? We talked about this with the 40 units per day. So you may have a bottleneck in your factory. So then the question is, how do we detect one in our law firm? Well, the way you detect a bottleneck in your law firm is through Kanban boards. Because what a Kanban board will reveal, if you have it set up properly, is that one of your swim lanes will be bigger than the others. In this case, there is a bottleneck between filed and waiting. You can see it right here. That's where there's a big pileup of cards. That suggests that you're having a problem transitioning from filed to waiting. So that's where you're going to want to look for your bottleneck. I'll tell you an example in Rocket Matter where we did this. So when you develop a software feature, it starts with us talking to attorneys, and then we gather the requirements of what they want to build or what they would like to see. Then we go design it. We show them the pictures and everybody's happy, and then it goes to engineering. After the engineers build the feature, it goes to the quality assurance department, or QA. And once the QA people test it and make sure that it's safe for consumption, then it goes into production. So you have this requirements, design, engineering, QA, production kind of workflow, right? So we would see this huge bottleneck in QA. So we would be able to engineer and build all these features, and we wouldn't be able to get them out the door because they get stuck in QA. So when we had the Kanban board, we realized that because there was this huge pileup of features happening in QA. So what we decided to do was we added a QA resource, and then we started automating some of our QA tasks. Instead of manually clicking around the application, there's programs that you can use to automate that. And then the pileup moved to engineers. So we had all these features in engineering that had to be worked on. So we added an engineer. And so what happens is your optimization becomes like a game of whack-a-mole. You find your bottleneck, you improve it, and then a slowdown is going to happen somewhere else. So that's why, this whole idea of continuous improvement is a big idea, because, over time, the whole system gets stronger and stronger and stronger. You're going to eliminate one bottleneck at a time. It's going to cause other parts to appear slower than others, and you're going to get backups there and overproduction there, and then you have to address that issue, and it just keeps on moving around. So that's another reason why Kanban boards are important. So we went over transportation and motion waste. We went over inventory and waiting. We went over overprocessing. We did bottlenecks. We talked about overproduction. We talked about defects. And then in the rest of the book, just in case you're curious, we don't just talk about kind of some of these waste and system thinking ideas and throughput rates and cycle times. We also apply these ideas to how you can keep on top of your firm through key performance indicators and what tools you can use. We talk about marketing and the metrics and optimizations you can do around that, and how to look at it from a lean perspective. We talk about processes and standardizations, and we talk about what meetings to do to run your firm in an efficient and effective manner to constantly kind of point yourself towards true north and more profitability. Thank you so much for your time today. The course number is 3647. It's a Florida Bar CLE, Florida Bar CLE 3647. Please take a moment and note that down for your CLE material. For those of you like me on the East Coast of Florida, I wish you the best of luck with the hurricane that's coming, with Dorian. And if you have any questions for me, you can always reach out to me. I'm Larry@rocketmentor.com. I am incredibly, available and open to talking to people. So do not hesitate to reach out. Take a look at Rocket Mentor if you haven't seen it. We also have a great podcast called the 10-Minute Law Firm Podcast, and I do a podcast with my co-author Dave Maxfield called the Lean Law Firm Podcast. Go take a look for those too. And I hope to see you on future webinars. Thank you very much, everybody.